The night sky was lit with flashes of bright explosions as the war between humans and the Xorith raged on. Captain John Hargrave sat in the cockpit of his ship, staring out at the chaos unfolding in the galaxy. His eyes were tired, the weight of countless battles pressing down on his shoulders. The Xorith, a technologically advanced alien race, had been pushing humanity to the brink of extinction for years. Their superior weaponry and vast fleets seemed unstoppable. But John, along with his team of soldiers, wasn't ready to give up. They were on a desperate mission now. The Xorith had captured a strategic planet that was essential for the survival of humanity. Without it, Earth and the last remaining human colonies would be doomed. The battle had been fierce, and John's forces were outnumbered, surrounded by the enemy. His ship, the Sparrow, was heavily damaged, and his crew was exhausted. But John wasn't going to retreat. Not this time. "Captain, we're about to hit the enemy's perimeter," his tactical officer, Lieutenant Harris, said over the comms. "We can't hold them off for much longer." John gripped the control panel. He had one option: a full assault. No retreat. No second chances. It was either they take the planet back now, or the human race would lose everything. The Sparrow dropped out of warp speed, diving straight into the heart of enemy lines. John could see the Xorith fleet on the horizon, their massive warships and robotic drones blocking the sky like a storm. The air was thick with tension, and every second felt like an eternity. The ship rocked as enemy fire hit their shields, sending sparks flying inside the cockpit. "Brace for impact," John shouted to his crew as they prepared to engage the enemy head-on. He activated the cloaking device on his ship, hoping it would give them a moment of advantage before the Xorith knew they were there. The Sparrow vanished from sight, but John knew they couldn't stay hidden for long. Time was running out. Just then, a massive explosion shook the ship. John's heart raced as his sensors went wild. A giant alien ship, part of the Xorith's flagship fleet, was targeting them. It was massive, its hull covered in dark metal, and its weapons seemed to pierce through space itself. John was forced to take evasive maneuvers, twisting and turning through the debris field of destroyed ships. But in the chaos, something unexpected happened. Through the smoke and debris, John spotted something strange. A small, unmarked cargo ship. It was falling through the atmosphere of the planet below, spiraling out of control as it tried to escape the ongoing war. "Do you see that?" John asked his crew. Lieutenant Harris zoomed in on the ship's signature. "It's not a military vessel. It's civilian, and it's in distress." John didn't hesitate. He ordered the crew to divert their course and intercept the ship. They couldn't afford to waste time, but something about the ship felt different. He wasn't sure why, but he knew they had to investigate. As they got closer, John could make out more details. The ship was old, beaten up, and its hull was scared from battle, but it wasn't an ordinary cargo ship. "Prepare to board," John ordered. "Let's find out who's aboard." The Sparrow landed near the wreckage, its landing gears screeching against the planet's surface. The crew quickly suited up and moved toward the wreck. As John stepped off the ship, the ground beneath him trembled slightly. The air smelled of burning metal, and the sky above was a dull red from the ongoing battle. They approached the wreckage cautiously, weapons drawn. It was then that John saw her. Lying unconscious among the wreckage was a beautiful alien girl, her skin a deep shade of purple, her long silver hair tangled and covered in dirt. She wore simple clothes, nothing like the heavy armor of the Xorith. Her face was calm, almost peaceful despite the chaos around her. John's first instinct was to help her, but as he knelt beside her, he realized something strange. This wasn't just any alien. She had an aura of power about her, something he couldn't explain. Her breathing was steady, but she had visible marks on her body, signs of being restrained. It was clear she had been a prisoner, and John had no idea why. "Sir, what do we do with her?" Lieutenant Harris asked, his voice cautious. "She could be dangerous. The Xorith may have sent her here as a trap." John glanced at the girl again. Something about her made him feel like she wasn't a threat. In that moment, he made a decision. "We take her with us," John said firmly. "We need all the help we can get. She's not one of them, and we'll find out who she is later. For now, she's with us." As the crew carefully loaded the alien girl onto their ship, John couldn't shake the feeling that they had just stumbled upon something important. Who was she? Why was she on a civilian ship? And why had the Xorith left her behind? The answers, John knew, would have to wait. Right now, there was a war to fight, and the fate of humanity rested on his shoulders. But as the Sparrow lifted off from the surface of the war-torn planet, John couldn't help but feel that the arrival of this mysterious girl had changed everything. The battle was far from over, but John knew one thing for sure. This war had just taken a new turn. And whatever role the girl would play in it, he had to be ready for what was coming next. The fate of humanity, and perhaps the entire galaxy, might depend on it. The Sparrow soared through the stars, heading toward a distant human-controlled base. The emergency landing had been rough, but they had managed to get out of the immediate danger. The unknown alien girl, who John had found on the wrecked cargo ship, was still unconscious. His crew, especially Lieutenant Harris, were uneasy about her presence. The strange girl's sudden appearance, and the fact that she seemed to have no clear connection to the Xorith, made them suspicious. John couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her than met the eye. He had seen countless alien species in his career, but none like her. She wasn't part of the usual enemies they fought against. As the Sparrow entered the quiet depths of space, John made his way to the med bay where the girl had been taken. Her strange appearance was both mesmerizing and unsettling. He stood at the door for a moment, watching her as she lay on the bed, still unconscious. "You've got to be kidding me, John," Harris said from behind him. "What if she's some kind of Xorith spy?" "I don't think she is," John replied, his voice calm but firm. "She's not like them. I don't know what she is, but I'm not leaving her behind. She might be the key to winning this war." Harris wasn't convinced. A key to what? "We don't even know her name." Before John could respond, the girl's eyes flickered open. She blinked, adjusting to the light, and then slowly sat up. Her movements were graceful, almost like she was used to being in control. Her eyes locked onto John's, and for a brief moment, he felt an unexplainable connection. She was no longer the stranger who had just been rescued from a crash. She was something more. "Where am I?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. Her accent was unfamiliar, and John realized she wasn't speaking any language he had ever heard before. "I'm Captain John Hargrave," he said, trying to keep his tone friendly. "You're aboard the Sparrow, a human ship. We rescued you from a wrecked cargo vessel. We're in deep space, heading toward a human base." The girl looked at him, her brow furrowing as she tried to process what he was saying. "Human." She repeated the word, her voice quiet. I don't understand." John hesitated for a moment, unsure of how much to tell her. He decided to start with the basics. "We're at war with the Xorith. They've been attacking us for years. You were on a ship that crashed. Can you tell me who you are? How did you end up there?" The girl was silent for a long moment. Her eyes moved as though searching for something inside herself, as if trying to remember. "My name is Lyra," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. I was escaping. They were hunting me." John felt a chill run through him. "Who was hunting you?" "The Xorith," Lyra replied, her voice trembling slightly. "They want me because of what I am. I am the last of my kind." John's heart raced. The Xorith didn't typically hunt down individual aliens unless they were a threat. So why would they be after her? What was so special about her that made her a target? He needed answers, but he didn't want to push her too hard. Lyra looked exhausted, and he didn't want to scare her off. "We're not the enemy," John said, trying to reassure her. "You're safe now. The Xorith are not going to get you." But Lyra wasn't so sure. Her eyes darted around the room, filled with a mix of fear and uncertainty. "They'll find me," she said, her voice trembling now. "It doesn't matter where you go. They'll always find me." John tried to calm her down. "If they come after you, we'll protect you. You're not alone anymore. But we need to know more about why they want you. You must have some idea." Lyra hesitated before answering. "I am not just a slave. I am of royal blood. My people were once powerful. The Xorith destroyed my world. They killed everyone. But before they did, they took me. They kept me hidden because I have something they want, a power that could destroy them." John's mind raced. What kind of power could a single person have to destroy an entire empire? He needed to know more, but Lyra seemed reluctant to go deeper into the details. "I can't help you," Lyra continued, her voice quiet and sad. "I can't control it. I didn't even know I had it until recently." John was about to ask more when Harris stepped into the room. "Captain, we've got a problem. The Xorith know we're here. They're already tracking us." John's stomach tightened. He had expected the Xorith to come after them eventually, but not so soon. "How long until they catch up?" "Not long," Harris replied grimly. "We've got a few hours, maybe less." John turned back to Lyra. "We're running out of time. Can you help us? If what you're saying is true, then you might be our only chance to fight back." Lyra's eyes met his, and for a moment, John could see a flicker of hope in them. She wasn't completely sure of herself, but she was willing to try. She stood up, her posture straightening, her expression serious. "I will try, but I can't promise it will work. If I lose control..." John didn't need to hear the rest. He nodded. "We're with you. We'll do whatever it takes." As the sparrow sped through space, John couldn't help but feel that Lyra was the key to something much larger than just a single battle. She was tied to the past, to an unknown legacy, and John's team would need to discover what that legacy was if they had any hope of defeating the Xorith once and for all. The stakes had just gotten much higher, and John knew that they were walking into something that could change the course of the entire war. But the question remained, what exactly had Lyra inherited? And could her mysterious power be enough to defeat the Xorith? Only time would tell. The Sparrow continued its journey through the cold emptiness of space, its engines humming steadily as John sat in the command center, staring at the stars outside. The situation was becoming more urgent with every passing minute. The Xorith fleet was closing in fast, and John knew it was only a matter of time before they would come face to face with the enemy. As captain, he had to keep the morale of his crew high, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something big was about to happen, something that would change the course of the war. Lyra was still on board, sitting quietly in the medbay. Since her revelation about being of royal blood and the potential power she held, she hadn't said much. John wasn't sure if she was still processing everything, or if she was simply trying to keep herself under control. Either way, he knew she was hiding something. Lieutenant Harris came into the room, looking tense. "Captain, we've got a problem. The Xorith fleet has detected our presence. We'll be in firing range in less than an hour." John nodded, his mind racing. He had expected this, but it didn't make it any easier. "What about the plan to use the cloaking device?" John asked. Their ship was equipped with a top-of-the-line cloaking system, but using it for too long could drain their energy reserves. They could only stay hidden for a short time before they'd need to fight back. "We've already used it once," Harris replied. "It'll only give us a few minutes of advantage at best. We need to prepare for the worst." John sighed. He didn't have much time left, and the pressure was mounting. As much as he wanted to find out more about Lyra and her abilities, the war was right in front of them, and there was no time to waste. He turned to Harris. "Get the crew ready. We're going to make a stand." Harris nodded and left the room, but John stayed where he was for a moment longer, lost in thought. The bond between his crew was strong, forged through countless battles and shared struggles. They trusted each other with their lives. But now, there was something new, something that John couldn't quite explain. The connection he felt with Lyra was growing, something deeper than just their shared struggle. In the hours leading up to the confrontation with the Xorith, John made a point of checking in with his crew. They had all seen war, and they had all felt the weight of it. But as they prepared for what might be their final battle, John noticed something different in the air. It was the quiet before the storm. The crew was tense, but they were ready. They had faced worse odds before, and this would be no different. At least, that's what they hoped. John made his way to the med bay where Lyra was sitting. She was staring out of the small window, her expression distant. Her long silver hair cascaded around her face, and she seemed lost in thought. When John stepped into the room, she turned to face him, her eyes immediately locking onto his. "You're ready for battle," Lyra said softly, as if reading his mind. There was something in her tone, something ancient and wise that made John pause. "We don't have much of a choice," John replied, sitting down across from her. "The Xorith are coming. But we need to talk about your power. You said you had something that could help us." Lyra didn't respond immediately. She seemed to be thinking, weighing her words carefully. "It's not something I can control easily," she said at last. "The power that runs through my blood is dangerous. It was meant for destruction. My people used it to fight against the Xorith long ago, but it's unpredictable. If I lose control—" "I understand," John interrupted. He knew what she was going through. "You've been through a lot. We don't have to use it unless we have no other choice." Lyra nodded but still seemed uncertain. She stood up, her movements graceful and fluid. "You're not like the others," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The others who have tried to fight the Xorith. They all saw me as a tool, a weapon. You see me as something more." John met her gaze. "You're not just a weapon, Lyra. You're a person, and we need to work together if we're going to survive this." For a moment, Lyra seemed to relax, as if John's words had eased some of the tension in her. "You're not like the others," she repeated, almost to herself. "Maybe you're right. Maybe together, we can do this." Just then, a sudden alarm blared through the ship. The red warning lights flashed in the hallway, and John's heart raced. He didn't need to be told what it meant. The Xorith had arrived. "Battle stations," John shouted over the comms, his voice strong and steady, despite the rising panic. The crew scrambled to their posts, preparing for the inevitable fight. John quickly made his way to the command center, where Harris was already at his station. "Time to make our stand," Harris said, locking eyes with John. "The Xorith fleet is just ahead. We've got one shot at this." John nodded. He turned to Lyra, who had followed him into the command center. Her eyes were determined now, her fear replaced by a quiet resolve. She was ready, just like the rest of them. "We're all in this together," John said to his crew. "We fight as one. We stand or fall together. Let's show them what humanity is capable of." With that, the Sparrow charged forward, the crew ready to face the Xorith fleet. The hum of the engines was a steady beat in John's ears as he guided the ship into battle. The crew worked like a well-oiled machine, each member doing their part with precision and skill. But as the Xorith warships came into view, John knew they were facing overwhelming odds. The enemy was vast and powerful, their weapons capable of destroying entire fleets. But he had something they didn't: the unity of his crew and the mysterious power that Lyra possessed. Lyra stepped forward, her eyes glowing faintly with an inner light. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steady. "Let's show them the power of what we've become." John looked at her and then at his crew. He saw the same fire in their eyes, the same determination. They weren't just soldiers anymore. They were a family, bound together by a common cause. They had fought hard to get here, and now they were ready to fight even harder. The first volley of fire from the Xorith fleet came crashing toward them, but John didn't flinch. He had faith in his crew. He had faith in Lyra. They were ready, and together they would face whatever the Xorith threw at them. As the battle began, John knew one thing for certain. This fight was far from over. But no matter what happened, they would fight with everything they had. Because together, they were unstoppable. The Sparrow trembled under the impact of enemy fire. John could feel the heat of the battle all around him. The Xorith ships were relentless, their weapons powerful and precise. John's crew was fighting hard, but the odds were overwhelming. Every moment felt like it could be their last. The sound of weapons clashing, alarms blaring, and the crew's shouts filled the air. In the midst of it all, John's eyes kept drifting to Lyra. Her mysterious power was their only hope, but even that seemed uncertain. Would it be enough to turn the tide? John's thoughts were interrupted as the ship jolted again, throwing him off balance. He grabbed the nearest console to steady himself. "Report," he shouted, his voice strained from the intensity of the battle. "Hull breach in sections 5 and 6. Harris's voice came through the comms, panic creeping into his words. "We're losing pressure. Shields are at 40% and falling fast. We need to get out of here." John's heart raced. They didn't have much time left. If the Sparrow couldn't hold up much longer, they would be sitting ducks. He turned to Lyra, who was standing near the control panel, her eyes closed in concentration. Her expression was calm, but John could see the strain on her face. She was trying to tap into her power. He could feel it in the air, like an electric charge hanging in the room. "You need to release it, Lyra," John said urgently. "We need that power now." Lyra opened her eyes, locking gazes with him. "I can't control it fully yet," she said, her voice trembling. "If I release all of it, there's no telling what might happen. It's too dangerous." John didn't have time to argue. "You don't understand. If we don't act now, we'll lose everything. We need you." Lyra hesitated, the weight of the decision clearly pressing down on her. But before she could respond, an explosion shook the ship once again, throwing everyone off balance. The lights flickered, and alarms blared louder than ever. John's mind raced as the reality of their situation set in. He could hear the crew scrambling, trying to keep the ship in one piece. But it was clear now that their survival depended on Lyra and her mysterious power. "Lyra," John shouted, "please, do it. We don't have a choice anymore." She looked at him, fear and determination in her eyes. With a deep breath, Lyra nodded. "All right. But you need to be ready for the consequences." John didn't have time to say anything else. He moved quickly to the cockpit, where Harris was still trying to keep the ship stable. "Get ready to engage the cloaking device again," John said, his voice steady but urgent. "We're going to need all the advantage we can get." Harris nodded without a word, but John could see the doubt in his eyes. They were running out of time. Lyra moved to the center of the room, her body glowing faintly with an unnatural energy. John watched her closely, his heart pounding. The air around her seemed to ripple, like the space itself was bending in response to her power. She closed her eyes, focusing all of her energy into the task at hand. The ship seemed to hum with an otherworldly force as her power began to build. Then, in an instant, Lyra released the energy. The ship shook violently, as if the very fabric of space itself was warping around them. The brilliant light flooded the cockpit, blinding everyone for a split second. The force of the release sent a shockwave through the ship, rattling every crew member to their core. John stumbled back, shielding his eyes, but he could feel the raw power coursing through the air. It was unlike anything he had ever experienced. When the light faded, John opened his eyes and saw a massive shockwave ripple through the enemy fleet. The Xorith ships that had been surrounding them were now thrown off course, their systems momentarily disabled by the force of Lyra's power. The Sparrow was now cloaked in a shimmering, translucent field that made it almost invisible to the Xorith. For a moment, John allowed himself to breathe, thinking they had won. But then he saw it, the flicker of a shadow at the corner of his vision. A figure emerging from the darkness, moving with a purpose. John's heart sank as he recognized the figurine of his own crew member, Lieutenant Harris. "Harris," John called out, but it was too late. Harris was holding a weapon, one that John had never seen before. His eyes were cold, filled with something dark and dangerous. Before John could react, Harris turned, aiming the weapon directly at Lyra. "No," John shouted, lunging toward him. But Harris was too fast. The weapon fired with a sharp, devastating blast, hitting Lyra square in the chest. She gasped, her body jerking backward from the impact. John's heart stopped. "Lyra!" he cried out, rushing to her side. But Lyra was already slipping away, her once vibrant glow dimming. "No, I'm sorry," she whispered weakly, blood trickling from her mouth. "I couldn't hold it. John shook his head frantically, his hands desperately trying to stop the bleeding. "Don't speak," he pleaded. "You're going to make it. Just hold on." But Lyra's eyes fluttered shut, her body going limp in his arms. John felt a crushing weight in his chest as her life slipped away. The power she had given them to defeat the Xorith had come at a terrible cost, her life. Harris stood there, his weapon still in hand, his expression unreadable. "I did what I had to do," he said coldly. "She was too dangerous. You should have known that, Captain." John's eyes burned with fury, but he didn't have the strength to fight back. "You betrayed us," he whispered, the pain of Lyra's death cutting deeper than any wound. Harris smirked, then turned and walked away, leaving John holding Lyra's lifeless body in his arms. The ship was still cloaked, but John's mind was spinning. How could this happen? How could one of his own betray them at such a critical moment? But there was no time for grief. There was still a battle to fight, and John knew that now, more than ever, they needed to survive. They couldn't let Lyra's sacrifice be in vain. The crew's bond had been broken, but John had one mission left: to make the Xorith pay for what they had done. And he would make sure Harris would answer for his betrayal, even if it cost him everything. The fight wasn't over. It had only just begun. John stood alone in the command center, his eyes focused on the vastness of space ahead. The Sparrow was cloaked, hidden in the shadows of the enemy fleet, but John could still feel the weight of the situation pressing on him. The death of Lyra still hung heavily on his heart. Her sacrifice had given them a chance, but at a terrible cost. The crew was shaken, but there was no time for mourning. The Xorith were still out there, and they had to stop them, once and for all. The silence of space was deafening, but John could hear the soft beeping of the console, the hum of the engines, and the occasional voice over the comms as the crew worked to prepare for the final assault. The Xorith were powerful, and even though they had temporarily disrupted their fleet with Lyra's power, the enemy wasn't finished. If anything, it had only made them angrier. John turned to Harris, who was standing by the weapons console, his expression unreadable. After the betrayal, John couldn't trust him anymore. But there was no time for personal conflicts now. They had a mission, and it had to be completed. "Are the weapons ready?" John asked, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his chest. Harris nodded without a word, his hands moving rapidly over the controls. John could see the flicker of tension in his eyes, but said nothing. They both knew what was at stake. John walked over to the viewport, staring into the void of space, watching as the Xorith ships loomed large on the horizon. They were still positioned in tight formation, their shields raised and weapons ready. John knew that the only way they could win now was by taking them out all at once. "Captain," came a voice from the communications panel. It was Lieutenant Garrett, the ship's strategist. "We've identified the flagship of the Xorith fleet. It's heavily guarded, but if we take it down, we'll cripple their entire force. It's our best shot." John's mind raced as he weighed the options. Taking down the flagship was a bold move, but it was their only chance. He turned to Harris, who was watching him closely. "Prepare the main cannon. We're going for the flagship." Harris hesitated for a moment before responding. "Are you sure, Captain?" The main cannon can only fire once before we need to recharge. If we miss, we're exposed. John met Harris's gaze, the tension between them palpable. We don't have a choice. We make the shot count. If we don't, this is over. With a quick nod, Harris turned back to his console, his hands moving with precision. John took a deep breath, steeling himself for the fight ahead. His crew was ready. They had been through so much together, and now it all came down to this. Locking on target, Harris called out, "Ready to fire on your command." John stepped forward, his eyes fixed on the Xorith flagship through the viewport. It was massive, easily the largest ship in the fleet, and heavily shielded. But John knew that it was vulnerable if they could just get in close enough. The Sparrow had the advantage of stealth, and they would use that to their full advantage. "Fire!" John shouted. The room shook as the main cannon fired, a brilliant burst of energy streaking out from the Sparrow and heading straight for the Xorith flagship. John watched in tense silence, praying that they had calculated everything correctly. The shot hit its mark with a tremendous explosion. The Xorith flagship shuddered as its shields buckled under the force of the blast. The entire ship seemed to flicker, the shields failing under the strain. John's heart raced as he saw the ship begin to break apart. The blast had hit their power core, one critical shot, and they had destroyed the flagship. The enemy fleet began to scatter, their coordinated attack now in disarray. The Xorith were panicked, struggling to regroup without their flagship's command. But John knew it was only a temporary victory. The remaining Xorith ships would still be formidable, and they wouldn't give up easily. "Now's our chance," John said. "All hands, prepare for close-quarters combat." The crew quickly scrambled into action, their years of experience kicking in. The Sparrow wasn't built for direct combat, but they had a few tricks up their sleeves. John ordered the cloak to be dropped, revealing the ship just as they charged toward the scattered Xorith forces. The ship's cannons fired with deadly accuracy, picking off enemy ships one by one. John moved quickly through the ship, coordinating with his crew, ensuring everything was going smoothly. But even as they made progress, he knew they were running out of time. The Xorith were regrouping, and their retaliation would be brutal. "Captain," Harris's voice cut through the chaos, "we've got multiple ships locking onto us. They're targeting our engines." John's mind raced as he quickly assessed the situation. If the Sparrow lost its engines, they would be sitting ducks. He turned to Garrett, who was working on the ship's tactical systems. "Garrett, can we engage the defensive shields around the engines?" Garrett nodded quickly, typing commands into the console. "Shields engage, but they won't hold for long. We need to end this now." John's eyes flicked to the screen, where a massive Xorith warship was barreling toward them, its weapons charging. "Harris, we need one more shot. Target the lead ship. Full power to the main cannon." The crew scrambled to prepare for the final shot. John's heart pounded in his chest. The cannon could only fire once more before it required a full recharge, and if they missed, the Xorith would tear them apart. This was their last chance. "Firing," Harris said, his voice calm despite the danger. The Sparrow's main cannon fired again, a burst of energy that lit up the battlefield. The Xorith warship was hit square in the center, its shields crumpling under the blast. The ship's core exploded, sending a shockwave through the enemy fleet. The remaining Xorith ships faltered, losing their coordination in the wake of the destruction. John watched as the enemy fleet began to break apart. The battle was over. The Xorith were defeated. But even as the final blow was struck, John couldn't help but feel the weight of everything they had lost. Lyra's death, Harris's betrayal, and the countless sacrifices made by his crew. It all seemed to hang in the air, a reminder of the cost of victory. The Sparrow was battered, but it had survived. And so had John and his crew. They had faced impossible odds and triumphed, but at a terrible price. As the ship began to drift into the quiet of space, John looked out at the stars, knowing that the war was over, but the cost of their victory would stay with him forever. They had won. But the scars of battle would last long after the fire had burned out. The doors of the Sparrow opened, and the crew stepped out onto the landing pad. A delegation from the Galactic Council was already there, waiting for them. The council members were silent as they watched John and his crew approach. There was no applause, no fanfare, just a quiet recognition of the battle they had fought. John stood before them, his gaze steady. "We've done what you asked," he said, his voice firm. "But the cost was high. Many lives were lost. Many sacrifices were made. This victory wasn't just ours. It belongs to every single person who fought, who died, and who sacrificed to make it happen." The council members exchanged looks, but John could see the doubt in their eyes. They didn't understand. They never would. "We'll rebuild," John continued, "but we'll never forget what it took to get here. And we'll be ready for whatever comes next, because the galaxy is no longer a place where we're just survivors. We're fighters." With that, John turned and walked away, his crew following him in silence. They had done what no one thought possible. They had faced the impossible and won. The future was uncertain, but John knew one thing for sure. They were ready for whatever it brought. The dawn of a new era had arrived, and humanity would not be forgotten. They had fought for their place in the stars, and now they would defend it.